wanted to say something. Were they telling me she was saying Barbara Heffernan?
Okay, so we're having some people just starting to enter. We're gonna wait a little bit longer, like 5 or so minutes before we get started, but we'll be getting going momentarily.
I'll be right back. I'm going to grab some cough drops.
Long time no see, Wes.
Right.
Yeah, I mean.
I'm looking forward to this because several of the gay groups that I am in, we've been talking about this very issue. And so hopefully you'll have a lot of people from the various groups, but I will summarize it. But yeah. Has anybody heard, does anyone know of the documentary Gen Silent? Okay, if you don't know Gen Silent, you should Google it. Gen Silent is a documentary covering 3 LGBTQ people and what is going on in their lives trying to find a decent place. And one of the men, and it's an interracial couple, they had to move the lover 3 times before they found a place that was respectable for LGBT. So yeah, this is very timely because most of us I'm 76, so most of us are in that age range to be thinking of facilities.
Wes, how do you spell that? Is it Gen Silent, Jen?
Yeah.
Ames has very helpfully included a link in the chat to the Gen Silent film, which I'm also very interested to get a chance to see.
Here in DC, I think we have one that I know of that can accept couples if one of the members has dementia, and that is Forest Side here in DC. And some of our villages, if you're familiar with villages, some of our villages, Capitol Hill Village, Cleveland Park, and some others, also have LGBT groups within their village. And so that's another issue.
Wes, there was supposed to be a part 2 coming out to Gen Silence.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I heard that last year, but I haven't heard of an update yet.
Okay. Well, that's something we can look for.
That's really interesting. I'll have to look that up afterwards, but I think we're going to get started right now. For anyone who is late or misses the first part, this is all going to be recorded and put up on the Capitol Hill Village YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and watch that or know someone who wasn't able to watch this, they'll be able to find it afterwards. All right, so first off, welcome everybody to Capitol Hill Village's LGBT inclusion in senior living communities panel. Thank you all very much for coming. And my screen share just turned off. Very sorry about that. On screen right now is the contact information for all of our panelists who are here today. So if any of you want to contact them after this is over, you can use the information here. We also will be sending this out to everyone who registered with their email address. So if you aren't able to get this down at the moment, that's also completely fine. You can also email me or Sophia if you weren't able to find this information and you want to contact any of the panelists afterwards. All right. Yeah, so I think we're gonna get started. If the panelists could introduce themselves, that would be amazing. We could start with Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Friedman, and my company is CareFinder. I call myself a local senior placement specialist. I cover the DMV.
All right, Makeda, do you want to introduce yourself now?
Sure. My name is Makeda Vanderpuije. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am the executive director of LeadingAge DC. We are an association and we support the education and advocacy needs of nonprofit and mission-driven aging service providers here in DC.
Awesome. And Ames?
Hey, y'all. My name is Ames Simmons and my pronouns are he and him. I teach an online course at the law school at Duke, which is what you see in my contact info. I also teach a course on transgender health at George Washington in the fall, and I do LGBTQ consulting, including a lot of work with adult and aging services. Glad to be here.
Awesome, thanks so much. So I'm just gonna stop sharing right now so I can pull up the questions. Awesome. So for our first question, what are some green and red flags to look out for when someone is researching a senior living community online?
And when we discussed, it made sense for me to answer this since I'm in the field. And I just want to say, again, I'm really delighted to be here today. And just to say, I'm not wedded to any particular community. Speaking today, I'm not representing any specific long-term care organization. I'm here as in my position, I'm a guide or as I say, a researcher of communities for my clients. So, online availability of information is so great, right? It's at our fingertips. We can see things right away. And what you will glean or learn from a website is maybe some of the demographics, right? Whether a community has specific types of services that you're looking for, locations, perhaps floor plans, costs. You might even see a blog, testimonial page from residents and even staff. So from there, you can get some information that says to you, is there some diversity, some inclusion from there? The downside is when you specifically rely on, a website, is that you don't see the inside of the community, right? And there's no real life example from the resident's point of view. So that's really limiting. You really can't learn about the amenities that are offered to the LGBT community. You don't really know to the extent that people are welcomed. And the other piece is you don't learn if someone who is LGBT doesn't want to come out, is that okay? So those are some of the things that you really can't really distinguish and learn just from looking at a website. Which leads into the second question, that it's so important, if you can, to go in person to be able to tour a community. And that's what I do with my clients. And the benefit of, if I may go into the second question, unless you guys want to also share around number one.
Just so everyone knows, the second question is asking what are some green and red flags when you are going to see community in person as opposed to online?
Yeah, so, definitely the positives are that you can see the events that are offered to the LGBT community and be able to really see what diversity looks like there, you know? Do they have committees or subcommittees of LGBT residents? You can learn about the demographics of the employees and the residents. And also you can see whether they have inclusiveness training, right? Like, what do they do with their staff? You know, do they have policies around discrimination or harassment or bullying? Those are the things that you can learn from there. And you can even see if there's a resident satisfaction survey that they put out there. There's a lot more that you can see and determine for yourself. Is this a comfortable community that I feel supported in? The downside is you may have had your hopes on that community for whatever reason, and but their inclusion model is non-existent. So you may have to reset your expectations. So yeah.
I would just add, in addition to everything that Lisa has said, it's a good idea it's a good idea to ascertain if they have a resident non-discrimination policy and make sure that it says that they don't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. You might also ask if they have an equal visitation policy, so that if you have LGBTQ visitors who are going to come and see you, that they will be able to see you. And I would recommend asking also about a rooming policy, if that's applicable to your situation, whether it's that you want your same-sex spouse will be living with you, or whether it's a question of your gender identity, that you want to make sure that you're able to room with people in accordance with your gender identity. And the final thing I will say about that is to look around the community and see if they have any all gender restrooms that are available, or sometimes they're called family restrooms, or they're basically single user stalls. That's a sign that the community has. I mean, it's good for trans people, right? But it's also good for all kinds of other folks who, some people might be living with disabilities. Some folks might be chest feeding, might just prefer extra privacy, need an attendant with them. All of those things show that the facilities anticipated that you might be coming and that you're welcome.
Great points. Yep.
Yeah. You all both covered it very well.
Really good points. Thank you all so much. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier, my apologies, but for everyone in the audience, we will have time for audience questions at the end. The last half hour is reserved for those questions. So at that time, you can put your questions in the chat or unmute yourself to ask those. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, just write them down so you don't forget them. Moving on to our next question, though, what are some good questions that someone should ask representative of a nursing home, assisted living community, or CCRC?
So I'll jump in first, and there definitely are general questions that I try to coach my clients about asking when they go into communities about that community. From what are the amenities, the activities, what their medical service or capabilities are in treating people, et cetera, what the ratio of caregivers are to the residents, things like that. In addition, being LGBT, we got to see what kinds of events do they offer, again, are there committees? Are there subcommittees that are involved in the LGBT community? What kinds of policies, things like what I mentioned before, just to get a better sense of what does inclusiveness look like in that particular community for you to discern whether this is a place you want to be. One of the things too, besides training, staff, you want to include training specifically for the caregiving staff. Many of these folk come from different parts of the world where homosexuality is not only taboo, but can be, against the law. So it's really important that, they have inclusiveness training and, how they manage getting through that so that there isn't, that bias in terms of getting treatment. So those are some of the things that I think is important to see and to ask. The other thing that can be helpful to folk if they're really interested in learning about a particular community, many communities today say, why don't you have mom or dad, stay here for a couple days? I mean, that's where you get kind of up close and personal and see what it looks like, right? From learning about how the meals are and who the people are, and you really get an inside view. So that's on the table in a lot of communities today. So
I'll add a bit to that. So I cover providers in the District of Columbia, and here we have a law that's on the books and is being enforced called, I'm sure it'll come up again, the LGBTQ Seniors and Seniors with HIV Amendment Act. So for those looking for a long-term care community in the district, this is something that is fairly new, but you could ask this representative, is this facility in compliance with this act? Because it also includes a number of policies that promote inclusiveness, not only for residents, which is very important, but also to staff, to make sure that they have equitable conditions, in relation to all staff at the same level. So that's what I would recommend.
I will just add that I think I want to highlight something, one of the first things that Lisa said in answering this question, which is to try to get a sense of how connected the community is to the LGBTQ community generally, because we know as LGBTQ people get older that our social networks get thinner, and it's even more important that the place that you're living is seeking to maintain and foster those connections to the LGBTQ community. So I know when I go to Pride festivals, I always look to see if there are continuing care retirement communities who are a part of Pride. That's a clear indication from a community that again, that they've anticipated that you might be coming and that they want you there.
Again, really great points, all of you. Thank you so much. Our next question, this was brought up a bit earlier by Ames, but as you may know, for transgender and non-binary people, gender segregated spaces like male and female bathrooms with no gender neutral option can be very isolating and prevent access to care. How gender segregated is the average senior living community, would you say, in your experience?
Well, I'll pipe up first. I have a transgender friend, and she said she just laughed because in her community, there are all neutral gender bathrooms, just like there are ADA bathrooms. So it's really, a non-issue. And to be quite honest, many of the communities are set up like that now. So that's what I see.
I will add here to, again, this might be something that Lisa touched on earlier about like trying to investigate the programming that the facility has, and specifically like how gender separated is the programming. Like you could easily have like day at the spa instead of ladies' day at the spa. You could easily have Thursday night football instead of, guys' night at football, for example. So that helps to, especially for folks who are non-binary or gender diverse, beyond, the binary categories of male and female, to still be able to feel welcomed and that there's a place for them. And you might also ask, so let's say that you are not trans or gender expansive, but you're in a same-sex couple, it could be important for you to try to find out ahead of time the programming that they have. Is it inclusive of same-sex couples? Again, have they anticipated that you're coming and welcoming you?
Add a small note here, I noticed the question is speaking to the average senior living community. I do think that as a whole, the industry is moving in the right direction, but it will be important to investigate, each community to make sure that it's right for you, because I'm not sure that there really is an average. It's really very independent, especially around this region where we have a lot of single site facilities. Their policies, their community, their atmosphere is going to vary from location to location, which doesn't make things easier, but hoping that this conversation will help a bit.
Thank you so much. It's a really important point that Makeda made in the at the end. But also it is very helpful to know that things are generally moving in the right direction. Again, Ames mentioned this earlier with whether or not an organization is connected to Pride, but in your experience, what types of on-site LGBT clubs and events have you seen, and how common would you say that they are, and just generally what are they like in your experience?
The questions out there. Okay, so I can say, there is one community in my area, a lot of people know of Riderwood. It's what they call a CCRC. It's a continuing care community, and they have committees for inclusion. They have, part of their advisory council where they have 50% is represented by the staff and 50% by the employees. So they, really get into this in a bigger way. And I think that, and they also have resident run groups. So there's more say in what they're doing, amongst those groups. And I think they're a great example of to other communities that hopefully will embrace that kind of model. I think doing that where you really allow the residents to have a say helps, I believe, in broadening diversity and inclusiveness.
I'd like to add to that, since we're talking about clubs and events, and Ames, I believe, mentioned Pride festivals. I think that the larger community, so larger community groups, such as the one here at the Capitol Hill Village, the DC Department of Aging and Community Living, they have a float in Pride every year. And so participating in that activity, going to places where your community already is, where you are feeling like you're welcome and you're belonging, and talking with other individuals to see maybe where are they, living, where are they looking at, what have they learned about this area. I think that information sharing amongst us all, our global neighbors, is a great way to find out how you can get involved.
Awesome. Thank you again. Next question. Our next question has to do with medical care, specifically how difficult is it to find senior living communities with long-term HIV medical care available?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And what I would say in my experience, that the larger the presence of a medical center within a senior living community, the greater the chances are that they have staff that have a broader experience or practice with working with HIV, working with transgender, and supporting the medications that are involved with transitioning and that kind of thing. So again, I'm not here to sell Riderwood by any chance, but they're a larger campus. They have a medical center. They do have physicians that are experienced in working with HIV. I think the most important thing is in addition, and this sort of off, this is that in addition to seeing what kinds of care you can get within a community in terms of medical care for LGBT, you also want to see what it looks like where they can take you to the end of life as well. And can you be treated with certain medications and support services, not just for, the immediate, but can they take you through the aging process?
That's a great point.
I guess
This-
that this is
Oh.
not about long-term care facilities, but I do want to lift up the work that Sage has done in this area around aging and people who are living with HIV. So if you had a community that had good intentions and had no idea what they were doing, there are resources at Sage and elsewhere that can help them figure it out.
And they also have, Ames, correct me if I'm wrong, they can come out and do trainings for inclusiveness and such as well. So if you're in a community now and you want, the community to become more inclusive, they're a great organization to tap into or bring to the attention of the administration.
That's a super good point. There is a lot of training that Sage offers, and you could ask a facility if their staff is Sage Care certified, for example, and that'll give you some indication of what training the staff has received. If we get this far, I'm just gonna paste the link in case we don't get to it later. But there's also a resource, the Long-Term Care Quality Index, that is looking at the policies that residential long-term care facilities have in terms of residents who are LGBTQ, and we've gotten participation across the DMV. We're still looking to have more participation, but that's also a tool that you can use. But for sure, ask about the Sage Care certification. I'll put those links in.
Thank you so much. That sounds like an amazing resource. Again, getting more into like the more I guess more technical aspects of technical questions. What legal resources are available to LGBTQ older adults in order to protect them from harassment and discrimination in senior living centers? This could be federal or more DC specific, whatever you know about.
So there are tools that are available to folks in our community, the same as they are to anybody else. And that is, for example, the ombuds process, where there's a long-term care ombuds person who can investigate if something happens. There are federal laws that long-term care facilities have to abide by. For example, there are long-term care facility requirements for participation that are undergoing, they're being updated from the Biden administration that will partially, among other things, they will address the LGBTQ community. But there is not any completely inclusive federal protection yet. This is one of many reasons why our country needs to pass the Equality Act. There are many reasons. there are that, which isn't to say that you don't have any protections, right? You can go through this ombuds process. You can go through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. In DC, we have the advantage of this law, which Makeda mentioned earlier, and Sophia has put the link to the DC Office of Human Rights. Oh my God, this title is very long. The DC Care for LGBTQ Seniors and Seniors with HIV Amendment Act of 2020. Like Makeda mentioned, there's been added attention to this law over the past year or so because it has moved into its enforcement phase. So training is, supposed to be being completed for workers in long-term care, for example. There are many provisions in DC's law that are also criteria in the long-term care quality index. And Makeda and I worked on, presenting a crosswalk of all the ways like, hey, if you're compliant with DC law, you, actually have already satisfied many criteria in the long-term care quality index. So that's, to be clear, so the LEI, as we sometimes call it, like that is not a government sponsored project in any way. It is a joint project of SAGE. I mentioned them earlier. They're the nation's largest organization advocating for LGBTQ older adults, and the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, who has lots of other indices that you might have heard of, like the Corporate Equality Index or the Healthcare Equality Index. So I'm just gonna give you a glimpse. I'm not gonna, it's quite an, it's amazing that it's quite an extensive law. But so it says you can't discriminate on the basis of a person status as LGBTQ or living with HIV. And what that looks like is like, you can't deny admission, you can't forcibly transfer people, you can't evict people based solely on those protected characteristics. You have to have a policy about people being able to have rooming or housing in accordance with their gender identity. It's against the law to refuse to use a person's, to knowingly refuse to use a person's name and pronouns. Facilities cannot deny you the right to free association. So this, and they specifically say this includes consensual sexual intimacy, which is, a sort of under-discussed topic. They can't deny appropriate medical care. I think that's important. It's important, period. It's also, there are added dimensions of importance for people living with HIV and for trans and gender diverse people who, for example, are on a hormone replacement therapy or some other type of gender affirming care. There's protections around confidentiality. Those can be really important to people who who haven't disclosed that they're LGBTQ and are trying to figure out to what degree they want to do that. And again, it requires training. This is a really important law that DC should be proud of. There are only, that I know of, 3 states who provide similar, they sometimes call them LGBTQ long-term care Bill of Rights. So California has one, and New York and New Jersey both have these laws, and we're hoping that they will pass in other places. But it's sort of a model for other parts of our country who might be looking at trying to pass similar laws. It would not be surprising if Maryland and Virginia didn't pass a law like this at some point. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. This is out of curiosity though, hopefully this doesn't happen, but you know, if someone did experience one aspect of that of discrimination that is covered under the law and is illegal, do you know how they would report that to somebody?
The DC Office of Human Rights is who enforces this law, and they will periodically hold LGBTQ community discussions to raise awareness of the law and what the protections are and how to report it. I know that Capitol Hill Village hosted a session with OHR specifically to talk about this law. So there are always opportunities for you to hear more about it and to interact directly with the folks at OHR. That this is what they do every day.
I will add also, Ames, please correct me if I'm going off course here. I believe in this act, there is also a provision that the facilities must have posted in a place where it's visible the process to make complaints or report any kind of issues with compliance.
Yes, there are like a million questions that I don't know that OHR has settled yet. If you're not a residential long-term care facility, like how does that posting going to look? But yes, that is a component of the law.
Thank you so much for the information and answering my off the cuff question, I guess. Yeah, so moving on to the next question, you mentioned a couple times that part of this law includes training for LGBT non-discrimination and training along those lines. As you may be aware, though, it can be more difficult to have LGBTQ friendly policies and DEI training when an organization has less funding available, like in general, not just specifically for these programs. How easy, in your opinion, is it to find senior living communities that are LGBTQ friendly for lower income older adults?
This is such a good and important question. I'm sorry, did I talk over you, Lisa?
No, go ahead.
Okay, or Makeda? Okay. Part of the reason it's so important is because LGBTQ people, contrary to like the marketing myth that everyone is affluent, LGBTQ people are much more likely to be low income. That's for any number of reasons, including, you know, a lifetime of discrimination for some folks, like in employment or housing, or healthcare that has made it difficult to, you know, have the same level of savings that other people have. So LGBTQ people are more likely to be that their long-term care is more likely to be paid for by Medicaid. And honestly, like for most, I don't have a stat for you, but from my understanding, Medicaid is one of the biggest payers for long-term care. So, you know, Medicare doesn't cover long-term stays and nursing facilities. So it's a good chance that you'll be looking at Medicaid as a potential payer. It's also important. I'm just going to throw this out and give you my personal experience. It is a good idea if you are trying to plan for long-term care to think about long-term care insurance, specifically because the premiums just go up the older that you get. You know, you kind of become more of a risk that they have to offset with higher premium. And the same types of non-discrimination laws that apply to, you know, race, sex, disability, age, don't apply to long-term care. So they don't apply to disability insurance either. So I have applied for both of those and been turned down. And part of the issue, particularly for trans people, is that they seem insistent upon underwriting, trying to assess your risk based on your sex assigned at birth. And that's not going to work for a lot of trans people. So I just put that out there, that's another reason why it's important to be thinking about Medicaid, and to be thinking about long-term care, honestly, because it might be harder to be able to afford to have care in your own home. There's just now, starting to be some research about the quality of care that trans and gender diverse people even get in their own homes. So I don't necessarily want to say that you're definitely going to get worse care if you're in a residential long-term care facility, because that's not necessarily true. But I think there are ways that you can plan around Medicaid, like Medicaid trusts and other kind of estate planning, that if you see an estate planning seminar, you can learn more about trusts, as well as about advanced directives at sessions like that. So yeah, we're done because we're not covering that here.
I'd just like to add also, so I think it's good to say that it's area specific, because I will tell you, Montgomery County has offers so much support for people that are lower income in general, right? I can't tell you, there's not a day goes by I get a call with someone that's limited income with just a certain amount with Social Security, but I've been able to find them, quote unquote, a forever home, because there's subsidies that, especially with the residential based assisted living communities, these are homes that are assisted livings in the area, that are run by the ones that I'm vetting are those that have a medical component. They're either run by RNs or MDs. That's important to me for my clients, so that they can stay to the end of life if they need to be treated for higher level care. So there are subsidies that make it affordable for them to acquire some long-term senior living. And in addition to that, there are county grants that are given to organizations. There's an organization that is called the ARC of Montgomery County Senior Respite Program that offers a certain amount of hours of home care services to folk in Montgomery County. So they're definitely, and I don't think it's exclusive to the LGBT community. Definitely, Ames, you know better than me, what the numbers are in terms of those that, were on the lower income side for the community. But I see it for, everyone, that it's a struggle, right? So I try to find resources as much as possible for them. There's veterans benefits that can also supplement long-term care, and I have access to that information if anybody wants that and how to navigate that. And that applies to, the retired vet or if they have a spousal beneficiary for that. There was one other thing I wanted to just sort of clarify. So in the senior living communities, you have assisted living, you have independent living, you have memory care, you have long-term nursing care. Those first few I mentioned are all private pay. You got to pay out of the pocket. And I'm glad you mentioned long-term care insurance. Certainly the younger you are, the better it is to acquire it. For those of us that didn't get the memo till later in life, then we got to make a lot of money to be able to provide for that, right? So the Medicaid really doesn't come in until someone becomes a long-term nursing care resident. And here's the other thing, and I'll just say this and pass it on. A lot of people think if they have high medical needs and they have assets, that their only route is a nursing home. But what they don't realize until they get there is that whatever assets they may have need to be exhausted, given to that nursing home before Medicaid kicks in, until you can apply for Medicaid. So one of the things that I help people do is look at what are the benefits of going into a nursing home now, or would you rather use that money to have a better quality of life in a different type of community? And I've been so fortunate not only to find that for people, but where they can actually stay after they've exhausted those funds on whatever limited income they have. If that isn't the case, then they can still opt for the nursing home after they've used up all those assets. So I try to keep people out of nursing homes. I'd rather have other solutions for my clients as best as possible.
Both of you raised so many really great points about the critical nature of planning ahead for financing long-term care. It's something that I think we don't talk about enough. I did want to circle back in terms of the organizations and the facilities that perhaps maybe nonprofit, may be focused on serving a population that has less resources. And so, you know, how easy is it for these, what I would call more mission-driven organizations to be inclusive? And I do think that this will vary somewhat by organization, but in my experience, these mission-driven organizations, they're usually called like safety net facilities. The majority of their reimbursement is from Medicaid. The majority of their population is folks that are of lower resources. They will have a commitment in their mission to provide inclusive care, to provide a high quality of care to all of their residents. And if once they make that commitment, I think that they put as much effort into meeting those commitments as they do to, you know, providing a high quality of medical care, because they are used to putting their mission and their heart really behind what they do at the front of, you know, making a profit or anything like that, because they are nonprofit. So while for-profit communities may have more access to more resources and more money really to do different things, I think when it comes to intentionality and the way that the intention of an organization that is committed to being inclusive, I do find that they find ways to make sure that that is borne out in their culture and in their communities.
Those were all very great and very detailed answers. Thank you so much. Moving on to our next question. What does a typical anti-discrimination policy entail?
So I will share my screen and show you one. This is from a community in New York. All right, y'all, hold on. Okay. Okay, are y'all seeing this woodland pond discriminate? Okay, good.
Yes, thank you so much.
So this thing, you know, it's not long. This policy is a one-page policy, but I just want to kind of break down for you all the words on this page. So a non-discrimination policy, for one thing, is gonna have a definition of what are the actions that are discriminatory. So here you see they do not exclude, deny benefits to, or otherwise discriminate against any person. And then you look at the grounds of discrimination or the bases of discrimination. This is the one that I said, you know, it's particularly important to look for the words sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. And you see here that their policy does cover sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, as well as race, color, national origin, disability, diagnosis, or age. And then what like activities does it apply to? So they don't discriminate in admission to, participation in, or receipt of the services and benefits of any of the programs or activities, or in employment. So I think that is also important. We talked about this a little bit earlier. This non-discrimination policy can give you a sense of how supportive they are of LGBTQ workers who are important possibility models in many cases, can help to build trust when you are in kind of a vulnerable position sometimes with entering a facility to like be able to identify people who look like you. And then we talked about the setting. So in any of its programs or activities or in employment, and who it applies to. So this is also important. In this policy, they talk about whether the facility is providing these services directly or through a contractor, or it might say it could be a grantee if they have gotten any federal grants. And then they have recited here the federal laws that apply. I'm pretty sure that so New York's long-term care bill of rights didn't pass until late November of last year. So this policy, that's probably why that law is not listed here, because this revision is December of 2019. So Title VI applies its non-discrimination in federal funding. Section 504 of the Rehab Act, among other things, protects against disability based on, protects against discrimination based on disability. The Age Discrimination Act, and all of the regulations, some of which we referenced earlier, that the Federal Department of Health and Human Services and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services enforce. And then importantly, they give you a phone number. So they give you a way to contact. It would ideally, there would be more of a name there of who you could talk to, but it probably means they might have to update their policy more frequently if they actually had a name there. So that's what a policy looks like.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm assuming that's like a standard policy, like nothing is particularly uniquely good or bad about it.
I think it's especially good that they cover their contractors in the non-discrimination policy, because like they probably, Lisa or Makeda might have more knowledge on this point than I do, but there's probably a bunch of different contractors that you might interact with in that facility, whether it's meals or laundry or, the staff who help to keep the place clean. Could be anybody that is not an employee, but instead is a contractor.
You're absolutely correct. So,
So we're getting close to 4:30, which is when we're going to open up audience questions. For a reminder for everyone in the audience who wasn't here when I first mentioned this, the last half hour is reserved for audience questions, which you can put either in the chat to everyone or message just to me or Sophia if you don't feel comfortable saying it to everyone in the meeting. You can also use the raise your hand function on Zoom or just unmute yourself. Just be conscious of other people, of not talking over other people. I will let you all, since we have like 5 more minutes, I'll let you all get your questions in order. And the last question that I will ask all our panelists is, are there any other what resources could people consult regarding concerns about specific senior living communities?
I will throw in that some of the national LGBTQ organizations that do impact litigation, in other words, they don't take every single case that anyone calls them about. They generally litigate based on, a fact pattern that they think has a chance of actually changing the law. And I can think of two examples right off the top of my head. Lambda Legal had a case that was called Wetzel v. Glen St. Andrew, where a couple was discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation. And they also recently had an important settlement in Maine in a case. I'm sorry, this is not Lambda's case. This is GLAD, GLBTQ Advocates and Defenders. They're primarily a Northeastern region impact litigation organization. And a trans lady had just flat gotten turned down, like, for admission. And she contacted GLAD. And it went through the Maine Human Rights Commission, who issued a finding against the community. And it did settle, but one of the best things about the settlement was that the community agreed to have a policy specifically about how it was going to respect and affirm trans and gender diverse residents. So that really, didn't just help that one person, it helped everybody who's trans or gender diverse who might be seeking admission to their facility. So not always the first line of who I would suggest if you have a problem. Oftentimes these things are worked out informally, but those organizations certainly are there, and you can always complete an intake form.
Awesome, thank you so much. I know Sage also got name dropped several times throughout the panel, so they have very good resources as well.
Yes, and I'll just echo the long-term care equity index, which I do believe is in the chat, and reviewing which facilities have completed the long-term equity index. Ames mentioned this is not federally mandated or anything. It's a voluntary process, so it's not that if the facility is not on that list that they don't have inclusive policies, but I think it's a great way to just see who's being extra proactive about this.
Awesome, thank you. Great resources all around. We are going to move towards audience questions now, and Wes raised his hand first, so we're going to start there.